Welcome back to Dude, We Can Fix It. I'm going to show you how to replace the head gaskets on this Chevy Silverado. This is applicable to any 5.3, 4.8, and 6.0 liter engines. Reach right here, push to the right, and pull the hood up. So before we get started, I want to show you where this engine is leaking. It has an external leak on the back of the driver's side head. The last time this head gasket was serviced, the head bolts were not replaced and they were torqued down to the improper spec. Back here in the back corner, there's a leak, slow coolant leak. As you can see, there's a little puddle here. It's only been sitting here for about 15 minutes, so it's not a fast leak, but it is a leak. This truck actually drives okay. However, the owner does not like that it's leaking coolant. Very understandable. We can see that the water is dripping from here, and it's coming from the back of this head, which is right here where my finger's at. So, this is one of the possible symptoms. This is one of the better of the symptoms that you can have, which is just an external coolant leak. Now, the very first thing we're going to do is loosen this 8mm bolt and pop off the engine cover. Then we'll come in here, pull this tab up like such, depress here, and pull the connector off the MAF sensor. Then we're going to remove or loosen these 4 T25 bolts holding the airbox together. And now loosen this clamp holding the intake assembly to the throttle body. We just need a flathead screwdriver or looks like about a 10mm socket. Now that that's loose, we'll disconnect it. Just wiggle and pull. Set this aside. It looks like I am somewhat fortunate today. This truck, I guess, does not have the tow package, and so it does not have a mechanical fan. So I do not need to remove that because it does not exist. However, normally you'll have a fan threaded onto your water pump pulley and you'll need to get that off. If you don't have the correct tool to hold this and untwist the large nut, you can just leave the belt on and use a large 1/2-inch extension like this one here. You can put it on the outside of the nut and smack it with a hammer to try to break it loose. Remember, that goes counterclockwise. Then once you get the fan loose, you would take off the fan shroud, which is usually just 2 or 4 10mm bolts on either side. Pull the upper fan shroud off, pull the fan out, and then you can pull the lower fan shroud out, which is not bolted in. It just pulls right out. I don't have that, so I can't show you that. But the next thing we're going to do is remove the lower radiator hose right here to drain out the fluid, because most of these radiators do not come with a drain petcock. So now we just need a pair of channel locks to move this clip out of the way. And you might want to have a catch basin underneath the vehicle to catch some of the fluid coming out. But now we'll just wiggle and pull this hose off of here. Ta-da! And now we'll go ahead and disconnect the upper radiator hose. At this point, we'll just tuck this hose out of the way somewhere, and we'll go ahead and remove this small hose from underneath. This hooks up to the underside of the throttle body. So we'll pull the small clamp off, wiggle the hose, and pull it off. There we go. Just set this out of the way also. Now I'm going to use a 15mm socket and ratchet to loosen the tensioner and remove the serpentine belt. I'll just let it hang out down there out of the way. Now before we remove the alternator, we'll need to take a 5/16 wrench and disconnect the negative side of the battery. That way you don't have any chance of creating a short when you disconnect the positive lead from the alternator. Get that down out of the way. So now we'll remove this protective boot from the back of the alternator and use a 10mm socket to remove this positive lead. This is your charging lead that goes from the alternator to the battery. Remove your lead, set it out of the way, and then put this nut back on so you don't lose it. Now we'll remove this clip. Simply squeeze it and pull it straight out. Now we can remove the two 15mm alternator mounting bolts. And you may need to use a pry bar to pry up on the alternator to get it loose. Then you can remove it from the engine bay and set it out of the way. Up next, we're going to remove these 5 15mm bolts that hold on this power steering bracket. So we have 1, 2, 3, number 4, and the 5th bolt that we need is not this bolt. It's actually that bolt down there. See that? Facing directly into the block. If your battery jumper post here is in the way, you can bend this bracket forward just a little bit. That will give you access to this last bolt down there. So you can hit this one with a 6-inch extension. This is the only bolt that's different. As you can note, it's shorter, so don't mix them up. So now we just want to grab and move this entire bracket forward and out of the way. Just like such. Now we will remove our temperature sensor here. Just push down on the bottom clip and pull it straight out. There we go. That gives us a little more slack on our bracket. So we're going to use a screwdriver to come in here and disconnect this wire loom connector. There we go. Now we can get this a little bit more out of the way. Next we're going to remove this 10mm bolt. This 10mm bolt. This one down here. This one over here. And one more down on the end. We also need to remove this electrical connector. Get that wire out of there. There we go. And this electrical connector. There we go. And then this last one in the back. Now we can go ahead and remove the spark plug wires from the spark plugs. And remove the entire ignition coil rail from the vehicle. And repeat that on the passenger side. Alright, so when you get to this very last bolt on the end over here, what you're going to want to do is just have a regular 10mm socket and some sort of swivel extension or a U-joint like this. Also, just take that insulation blanket that's back here and push it out of the way so that you can access that last bolt. Set that on there and you'll be able to put an extension on it. There you got it. Now let's remove the 2 heater hoses from this bracket and remove this 10mm bolt that holds this bracket to the valve cover. Set this aside. And now we can remove this entire bank of coils. Just be careful routing all of your spark plug wires through. Make sure they don't get hung up, especially on your dipstick bracket, which we'll be removing later. There we go. Next, we'll remove the 3 10mm bolts. Now we'll finesse this bracket I believe it goes to right about there. And you'll be able to pull this off and then pop this connector out. There we are. We have a 10mm here that is holding on this wiring harness. There is a vacuum hose here that needs to come off. This hose may need to be replaced by the looks of it. Now let's remove this connector here. Now we'll need to pull this vacuum line off of here. There we go. Alright, now we have our barometric pressure sensor back here. We need to disconnect that. We have this other connector here. Disconnect it. Going to disconnect our vacuum line to our brake booster. Just pop that out. And now we need to disconnect our fuel line. First, we need to pop this clip off. There we go. Just pull it straight forward. Alright, we're going to have to get our special fuel line tool to get this fuel line off. Alright, so now we'll need a 3/8 fuel line tool here. It's a quick connect, so this is a quick disconnect, supposedly. You pop that on your line, you push it in. You gotta push it in until you hear a little click. Oh, there it is. See, it's all the way in. Rotate it around a little bit, and pull your fuel line off. You'll lose a little bit of fuel there. No worries. Just gasoline. Now we're going to disconnect all of our wiring harnesses for our fuel injectors so that you can see what's going on. That's all it is. You just push in this little tab and pull it out. It looks like at some point there was this sort of safety on here, so I guess you just pull that back first and then disconnect your wiring harnesses on all these. And there's 4 of them on each side. Just pop them out. So yeah, disconnect these 4 and then disconnect the 4 on the other side. Now we're ready to start unbolting the intake plenum. So there's 5 of these 8mm bolts on each side. One there. One there. One there, one there, and one in the back. And then there's 5 more on the other side. So let's go ahead and unbolt those. Alright, so normally these do stay on the intake. You just gotta get them loose. I'm not quite sure why that first one decided to come right out. It may have been reused. So as you start taking this apart, some fluids may start moving around. That's normal, don't worry about it. When you start taking the heads off, there's gonna be a lot of fluid moving around. It's okay. Because whenever you do this job, you gotta change your oil and your coolant. Alright, so we got to disconnect this coolant crossover hose that goes to the throttle. Okay, that should do it. Now we're ready to go ahead and take the intake out of here. Be very careful. We have several vacuum hoses that are still somewhat connected. This one we can actually go ahead and pop out. That's part of the valve cover. But we do have this vacuum line here. We have this electrical harness, which we're going to have to be careful and route that out. So just take your time and work this out of here. First, pull it straight up and move it towards you a little bit. When it starts hanging up, adjust your electrical harness and your vacuum lines we go. Move it a little farther. Adjust your electrical harness, vacuum line. Walk it on up. Alright, now the only thing that's remaining is we gotta get this vacuum line out from underneath here. So rotate it this way. Route that. Spin it around. Route that down through there. Now we're free and clear. Now is a great time to go ahead and vacuum all of this area and make sure you don't have any debris laying around. One thing you can do to make your life a little easier is to zip tie all of these wires together over here, because you do not want to damage your wiring harness. Just move this whole thing out of the way like such. Now you'll need an 8mm to remove these valve cover bolts. Now you can set your valve cover aside and do the same for the other side. So now we're going to remove the two 10mm bolts holding on this coolant crossover pipe. Your kit that you're using should have some new rubber seals to put on this. It's a good idea to do that. Now there's also a couple of plugs in the back. See the O-ring actually stuck in the block over there. Now we're going to remove all 8 spark plugs. I'm going to go ahead and take off this 15mm bolt holding on the dipstick tube. This last spark plug is a little bit difficult to get to, but you can hit it with just a spark plug socket and a ratchet. Once you get it nice and loose, you can finish unthreading it by hand. There we have it. Alright, so now we're going to start removing the exhaust manifold bolts. The ones on this side have been replaced before, and they are 1/2-inch bolts, and there are 6 of them per side. The stock ones are actually 13mm. So, proceed as you may. Alright, so I'm going to be using this ratchet wrench to get this last one on the driver's side. There we go. So, alright, so one thing that I just learned, or a better technique anyway, Always start at the back when you're taking out these exhaust manifold bolts, because the last bolt you take out is going to bind up a little bit when the exhaust tries to drop. So you want the last bolt to be the easiest one to get to. Food for thought. Also, this exhaust seems to be pretty free hanging, which is interesting. Usually I will disconnect one side of the exhaust down there where it has 3 bolts from underneath on either side. It doesn't really matter. That way you have a little more play with your exhaust. So you can pull it all over to one side or whatever and get it all out. See, you have to reach from underneath. There's 3 bolts that hold on, and 1, 2, 3, and there's a triangle shaped bracket that'll come off of there and release one side of the exhaust. But this exhaust has so much play in it already. I'm not sure if there's some brackets missing, or maybe this is true duals instead of a 2-into-1 setup, but I don't think I'm going to have to mess with it. But just in case you do, that's what you do. You just unbolt one side of the exhaust from underneath, and you'll get enough play to be able to maneuver and get your heads off. So now that our exhaust situation has been handled, we're going to go ahead and loosen the bolt on each of the rocker arms. This is an 8mm, so I'm going to go through first and break them all loose, and then I'm going to use the drill to finish loosening them. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is lift up on this entire bar and try to keep all these rockers in place. You might have to wiggle the bolts back down in a little bit as you pull them out. This one's not completely loose. There we go. So very carefully take your entire rocker assembly and keep it together like this and go set it on your table. Alright, now we can take all of our push rods out. I'm going to maintain the order and direction that they were in when I took them out. I'm going to put them back in the exact same way. Now I'm going to grab this entire rod that they sit on and carefully lift all the rockers up as an assembly, being sure that none of them get left behind. Now I'm going to go set this over on the workbench. I'm not going to disassemble it any farther. Well, fellas, at this point we're ready to start removing the head. First we're going to remove the 5 10mm bolts on the top side, and then we're going to remove the 10 head bolts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we got 5 down here by the exhaust manifold. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, a word of caution when you're taking these head bolts out, you're supposed to take them out in the reverse sequence that you put them in, and don't take them all the way loose one at a time. You need to loosen them all up a little bit and then take them out. Come down to the far end, I need to break that one loose. times you may need to tap it with a rubber mallet or such, but definitely use something soft as you don't want to damage this aluminum. We can remove this head and start working on the second one. Go ahead and pop these old gaskets off. And now let's dry all of the coolant that is sitting inside of these pistons. You don't want that sitting in there for too long because it will begin to rust. Alright, there we have it. One little thing to note here, you have these little alignment pins. This one, or this one back here, they will come out. See, these two are still in place, but the two on this side are not. So they're probably in the passenger side head. There they are, they're recessed inside of there. These empty bores, that's what it should look like. Not really sure why those are so beaten into there. Maybe it didn't line up well or something. But we'll need to get those out and set them back on the block side to help align all this stuff once it's ready to go back in. Yep, so up next, we gotta clean all this stuff up, get all the old gasket material off, and make this nice and squeaky clean for the reinstall. That's how you take the heads off of an LS motor, whether it be a 4.8, 5.3, or 6.0. Stay tuned, our next video is going to be putting all this back in the truck. So we're gonna clean it up, put some new head gaskets on it, and reassemble the engine. So if you enjoyed this video, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel. And as always, thanks for watching, and dude, we can fix it.